My name is Nat Smith. I'm one of the security analysts here at Gartner, and today it's my pleasure to speak with you about cloud security, managed services, and an important new market, SASE, Secure Access Services Edge. We're going to move through all of those things together, but before we get started there, it's important for us to look at what's been happening this past year. What are some of the new trends that you should be considering and taking advantage of? Well, to start with, there's a lot of movement into the cloud. And because of that, there's a lot of new security services that are available. Some of these come in the way of new tools, and other of them come in the way of managed services. Managed services are one of the important things to look for when you look at new security services in the cloud. The second thing that's becoming increasingly important is vulnerability management. Looking at where are you vulnerable. Many organizations don't know, and so vulnerability assessments and then the ability to continuously check and make sure that everything is safe and protected as much as possible is much more important than it has been in the past. In the case of network security, we're seeing a lot of evolution there. Now, this is where SASE starts to come in, but we also see a lot of traditional security services, network security services, evolving into cloud-based services. The last thing is looking at identity and managing that. Some would say that identity is becoming the new perimeter. I'm not quite sure I'm ready to jump on that ship just yet, but more than ever, when we look at concepts such as zero trust, when we look at how we best protect a mobile and ever-moving and unpredictable workforce with data that might be in many different places, identity becomes key to that conversation. Now, there's also something else that's important to discuss. In 2020, the global pandemic disrupted businesses in ways that we have not seen before. It crushed some businesses, and in the case of a few other businesses that were in the right place at the right time, it opened the door to opportunities like they had never had before. But whether it was something that was difficult to work through for most organizations, that would be the case, or whether it was some new opportunities which were beneficial to some businesses, either way, that global pandemic has changed the way we do business forever. One of the things that we see is the emergence of the hybrid workforce. This means the willingness of employers to allow employees, their workers, to work remote from time to time, possibly permanently, possibly once or twice a month, or possibly even a couple of times a week. All of those spectrum are included in the hybrid workforce. But there's also something else that's probably more important that happened as a result of the pandemic. There was a very, very aggressive move to cloud-based services. And let me explain to you why. Back in 2020, Gartner ran a survey with the leaders of business, the board of directors. Now, these leaders of business are responsible for making decisions, large decisions for the business, whether it's investments or whether it's even cutting back in some areas. They tend to not be technical, so they don't understand IT and they don't come from IT. But when we Gartner asked them, and we asked multiple different industries, and we asked organizations around the world, as a result of the disruptions of the pandemic, where are you going to change your investments? And in particular, where are you going to invest more strongly? The response was overwhelming for digital technologies, for digital transformation. And as a matter of fact, as the chart shows here, it's not a close second place. Digital transformation and the investment in digital technologies was more than twice as important across industries and around the world than any other area of investment. Now that's important. So organizations are looking across at their peers and saying, which one of my peers did better than me and why? And which one of my peers has done worse than me and why? as they look at the changes that the pandemic has brought upon them. What they saw was that those organizations that were more agile did better, and those organizations that could not adjust, that could not change very quickly, did worse. And they recognized that digital transformation is one of the best tools that they can have to prepare them to be agile. So they're going to start pushing down more and more, embrace digital technologies. This is the movement forward. So if you are in charge of IT, if you're the Chief Information Officer, the CIO, how do you interpret that direction that's coming from the leadership of the business? Well, in most cases, they look at that and interpret it as, let's move to the cloud, whether it's moving assets and workloads to the cloud, or whether it's changing the way that some of the services that we have been done, making them more cloud friendly. That includes things like microservices, composable business, and the like. Now, let's go one more step. If you're in charge of security in the organization, so you're the Chief Information Security Officer, or CISO, how do you interpret the CIO, your manager? How do you interpret their direction to move more to the cloud? Well, you have to move more to embracing cloud security. That has to be part of your strategy. But it's easy to say embrace cloud security. How do we actually go about and do that? Well, there's three things that we've seen quite consistently. To start with, the CISO looks and says, assets are moving into the cloud. Let's take our security processes, the things that we know how to do, and put them into the cloud as well to protect them, just like we've always done. That's the first step. And very quickly, many CISOs realize that the way that we do things on premise, the way that we've traditionally done things for years, doesn't always work as well in the cloud. There's more gaps. There's some things that we simply do not control in the cloud. Therefore, we cannot move these processes or these products into the cloud. So they find new cloud-based tools that are focused and designed and built just to work in the cloud. As a matter of fact, that's probably the source of more innovation recently and investment from venture capital and the like than any other area within security. So we move what we can, we get new tools where we can, and that takes a lot of effort. And then finally, they usually recognize that shouldn't we try to move some of the things that are still going to stay on premise to cloud-based services? As we look at the rest of our IT organization embracing cloud first, meaning we won't host all the services ourselves, we'll start to look for SaaS applications, we'll start to look for applications in the cloud. Shouldn't we start to look for some of those security services in the cloud? And the answer to that is yes. How are we doing as an industry with that? Well, it turns out we've been moving in that direction for some time. And maybe now, with more pressure to embrace digital transformation, to embrace the cloud, we're going to move a little more quickly. In the case of Secure Email Gateway, SEG or SEG, by 2023, we expect 40% of all of that market to be from cloud-based tools. That's something that's traditionally been on-premise. In the case of Secure Web Gateway, this is protecting the internet or that browsing experience on the internet. Already 60% of that market is cloud-based today. And if we're looking at SIM, which is part of security operations, helping us keep track of everything within our infrastructure, 90% of SIM solutions are either cloud-based or have significant portions that are served from the cloud. Cloud providers themselves, Alibaba, Tencent, AWS, or Microsoft Azure, they're already providing their own cloud-based security services, making it very easy as you move workloads into the cloud to take advantage of them. The more that we start to see some of this evolution into cloud-based security products, the more important it's going to be for us to find expertise in partnership with organizations that can help us get there. So managed security services or managed services in general are becoming much more important to many organizations around the world. And finding a good partner to help you on that journey will also be important to you. Now, I mentioned before at the beginning that one of the new and big cloud-based services is Secure Access Services Edge, or SASE, S-A-S-E. Maybe you've heard about that already, but chances are that you don't understand all about it. And the truth is, when we talk to different people within different organizations around the world, opinions are going to vary as to what is SASE. Well, in order for me to talk to you today about SASE, we need to get some of the fundamental and foundational pieces in place. So let's start with the definition. SASE is really about trying to bring together networking and security services into one converged, consolidated, integrated, single offering. Which services are coming together? There's 5 foundational services that we talk about when we are starting to build SASE. The first one is SD-WAN, or software-defined WAN. The second one is the firewall, and more particular, firewall as a service. The third one is secure web gateway. The fourth one is cloud access security broker. We usually call that CASB. And the fifth one is new. This one is zero trust network access, or ZTNA. SASE converges all 5 of those services into a single functioning offering, a single product. But we have all 5 of these, and in many cases, we've had several of these for years and years. It's not just that everything can happen on one box. SASE is a cloud-based service, and not just any cloud. SASE services are hosted in Cloud Edge, and Edge means that it's very close to where the users are. And it has to be, because these services that we're talking about here are extremely latency sensitive. If they're too far away, the performance will be very poor. But if they're on the cloud edge very close, then it'll work just the same as if it was in the office. All right, so how do these things come together? Well, in general terms, we're seeing 2 big pieces, the networking pieces as well as the security pieces being offered in a single solution. As I mentioned before, SD-WAN and some of the firewall pieces take care of a lot of the networking component, and then secure web gateway, CASB, ZTNA take care of the others. But you've probably heard about a lot of other features and capabilities that are there, and they are. They are functions and capabilities of some of these 5 markets. So the 5 main pieces are important, and the others are going to be part of various vendors' offerings and may or may not be present as you look at SASE offerings between the vendors. And if it's really important for you, that will help you choose your own SASE vendor. Now, many people think that SASE is a lot of hype, and they're concerned that SASE is not going to be around for the long term. Well, as of 2020, we were measuring SASE at about $3 billion. So $3 billion is a fairly big market. That's bigger than several of the SASE components itself. But it's substantial, which means that already many of your peers are buying into SASE components. But not only is it large today, we expect it to grow very quickly over the next few years, so that by 2025, it'll be just about $15 billion, which would make it one of the largest security markets in the world. That's a very quick and aggressive growth at more than 36% on average every year. So if you're wondering whether SASE is just a fad that's going to pass and not be important in a few years, that's not what the data shows. That's not what we are seeing in the market. SASE is one of those new trends that you must get into and understand, and the sooner you take advantage of it, the sooner and further ahead you will be from your competitors as well. Now, when Gartner starts to talk about and measure SASE, there's a lot of moving pieces here. And we've actually divided it into 2 camps and 2 areas that we will measure going forward. One is the WAN edge services. And we have a magic quadrant for that ranks and starts to identify some of the leading vendors in that area, as well as talking about those trends. This is largely SD-WAN and the firewall components that are there. But you'll notice there's a lot of other services, some very traditional like routing, quality of service, and WAN optimization that are also part of this offering. And the other side of things on the security, we have Security Services Edge, or SSE. SSE is new for Gartner this year. And as a matter of fact, we're so convinced of the convergence and consolidation there that we are taking what had been in 2020 Secure Web Gateway, SWG Magic Quadrant, and CASB Magic Quadrant, and we're putting them together into an SSE Magic Quadrant. As it turns out, most of the Web Gateway and CASB vendors also have ZTNA, so we will see that in this market and build up as well. So look for Magic Quadrants in those two areas to help guide you as you look at those particular services. For many organizations, and for some vendors, SASE is not something that today we are looking at and poof, tomorrow we have SASE. It's more of a journey. It's going to take some time for us to get there. And as we move closer towards it, we're going to start to consolidate vendors. We're going to start to consolidate and converge capabilities. And eventually we'll get to that one single offering. So don't be concerned if you feel that your organization is not ready to get into that end state of a single consolidated solution today. You can start and get there on your own time, at your own pace. And that's perfectly fine. As a matter of fact, some of the best SASE vendors will also help you get there gradually as it makes sense to your organization. You shouldn't necessarily feel like you have to rush or that you're going to be completely left behind. Many Gartner clients who are looking at SASE ask us, what things should we look for? How do we evaluate vendors? What's important for us to check? Well, here are a few things that I often tell clients, and maybe they will be helpful for you as well. As I mentioned at the beginning, SASE is a cloud-based service. So you are really looking to measure how well can my SASE vendor, the SASE provider, do a cloud-based service, because in many cases, cloud-based services is going to be new for that vendor. Some of the things to look for: subscription-based pricing. Cloud-based services tend to have subscription-based pricing. If the offering that you are getting for SASE isn't priced as a subscription, that's probably a good indicator that that is not a very good cloud-based vendor. The other thing that's really important for vendors to offer a strong cloud-based service is that they have cloud presence everywhere that you need them to be. We call a presence a point of presence, POP, or a POP. And so by looking at how many POPs a prospective vendor that you might purchase SASE from has, you can start to determine whether or not this is going to be a good cloud edge-based service. More POPs is better. And if they have very few, or if they don't talk about it at all, that's probably a red flag, meaning that's probably something you should be concerned about. All right, cloud-based services, we like them because we can burst as we need to, and then we can contract as we need to. But how do you know if a cloud-based service is very burstable? What things, what signs, and what clues can you look for? Well, one of the most expensive computationally services for a SASE vendor is decryption. As encrypted traffic comes up, they must decrypt it to be able to do security and then put it back to send it back out. It's not difficult to do decryption, but it's very computationally expensive, meaning it takes a lot of compute. So asking about decryption or how your vendor handles encryption is a great way to test how burstable they really are. Because if it's a problem for them to handle all of your traffic being encrypted, it sounds like they're not very burstable. It's not a very strong cloud-based solution. Another thing that causes stress on the system is the ability to add users in very quickly. Many organizations went through this at the beginning of 2020 as they sent workers home and needed very quickly to expand some of their cloud-based ZTNA. So vendors that were able to take on double, triple, quadruple the number of workers very quickly demonstrated that they were very burstable. Cloud-based services tend to be easy to deploy and easy to use. Think about how easy it is to get a new workload in Tencent or in Alibaba or in some of the other hyperscalers around the world. It's just a few clicks on the keyboard, it's a little payment, and it's done in less than minutes in many cases. SASE-based services are a little more complicated than that, but they should be relatively easy. If it takes weeks and months to deploy a SASE-based service, this doesn't really indicate that it's a cloud-based service in the way that we are looking for. So some of the things that you can test to see how easy and flexible the solution is: hybrid environments, whether it's in multiple clouds or on-premise and in the cloud, and how easy it is to deploy and manage and convert and move back and forth between those. Adding new sites in, particularly when we start to talk about SD-WAN, it's another good indicator of how easy it is to deploy and manage. All right, many organizations, many clients aren't ready to embrace all of SASE everywhere today. They may be ready in a few areas to try things out or to pilot them. So the vision and the roadmap or the path forward on how you get from 5 separate and distinct products and markets into one consolidated offering is important. Some vendors still have a little bit of a path to go as well. So looking at how that vendor would help you move along the path and how they themselves would adjust and adapt are both good indications of whether or not they have a vision for cloud-based service. Now, after we've done all that, we get to something that sounds pretty straightforward and probably pretty important: security effectiveness. How well is it at detecting? What kind of throughput can it offer? These are some of the things that we usually ask first when we look at security services. And yet, I have actually kept that for something towards the end. The reason for that is we know how to evaluate those things very well. We've been security professionals for many years. The cloud-based services side of things is a little more difficult for us. So after we evaluate and look at the cloud-based side of things, then you can start looking at the security nature of things, whether it's throughput and performance or effectiveness of detection. Now, this should also give you a little bit of a hint that some of the cloud-based capabilities are probably some of the less mature and things that we need to look at a little more closely from the start. So that's also the reason that we're looking at those first. Now, after listening to all of this, some of you may feel a little overwhelmed, and that's normal. And by the way, it's a lot of things to consider and to potentially plan for. So one of the things that we recommend in these cases is look for a good partner, a managed service partner that will be able to go on that journey with you and take you along the way. All right. Now, as we mentioned, it's a bit of a journey. And so along the way, there's going to be some pieces that come together faster than others. We see 2 centers of gravity as we look at SASE. One is on that networking side with SD-WAN and firewall. The other is what we're going to consider more of a security side with Secure Web Gateway, CASB, and ZTNA. Today, on SD-WAN projects and shortlists for vendor clients that are trying to decide who they're going to purchase from, it's very common to see an SD-WAN vendor and firewall vendors together on that same shortlist. And the capabilities that they offer are very similar. In fact, almost every major firewall vendor today offers a strong SD-WAN solution. So those markets have converged in many respects. I mentioned early on that Security Services Edge, SSE, and how we are actually merging the Secure Web Gateway and the CASB Magic Quadrants into that single one. Well, it turns out that the strong Secure Web Gateway vendors today already have CASB capabilities. And when we looked at the Magic Quadrant for CASB, all of the vendors there already had Secure Web Gateway capabilities. So it's very common in a Secure Web Gateway opportunity to see Secure Web Gateway vendors right next to CASB vendors competing for the same business. So there's already been some convergence there. If you have multiple vendors in these areas, This is an easy place to start converging without losing any capabilities or any of the best of breed features that you may be looking for. Now, that's going to put us in a place where some organizations will have SASE from a single vendor, and some organizations will have SASE from two vendors that are integrating together. Now, there's reasons that we would want to be in one case or the other, but let me walk you through some of the more important ones. When we get a single vendor converging all of the pieces together, this is where we will have the simplest and most consolidated operations, meaning less work, less time, less effort. In many cases, it will be a single configuration. Because of that, there's also a single stack that follows around users and data, which means there will be less gaps. It'll be simpler, easier, less gaps. However, that consolidation and that convergence today comes at a cost. Sometimes some of the extra features, the advanced features that we like in some of these solutions will not be present. So that's the trade-off for that single vendor solution. On the other hand, with a two-vendor solution, you can probably get best of breed capabilities that have been integrated together. So that's good news. Many organizations have separate teams. And so with separate teams, each managing their own product, it fits well with their organization today. However, that operational cost in keeping things integrated and potentially a few gaps and some things that won't be as integrated as others, and slightly less agile because it's different vendors with multiple consoles, that's going to be a cost. Operationally, you're going to be a little bit slower. You're probably going to be more expensive, and you're not going to be as agile. But that may be a better fit for you today. And a couple of years down the road, look for that single consolidated solution. Why would we want to keep around a two-vendor solution? Well, as I mentioned, there's 5 components within SASE, and most of the single vendor SASE solutions are going to be very strong in 2 or 3 of those components, maybe even some of the best in the world. But 1 or 2 of the other components may be a little bit lacking or less mature. And that might not be okay for your organization. So you may need to stay with a two-vendor solution. However, that will perpetuate a siloed situation for you, and operationally, it's going to keep things more expensive for you. Over the next couple of years, we expect many of these vendors to close the gap on their own individual pieces, where all 5 pieces of SASE can be very strong and very good, and possibly even world-class. And that gives the best of both worlds. But we're not always there just yet. Again, the partner becomes important here. Where do you want to look for SASE in your own network? Because you probably already have some components of SASE there. This is the where and how do I get started on my SASE journey? Well, this is where you can take an assessment of what you already have. Do you have SD-WAN in your network? If you do, there's a good chance that your SD-WAN vendor is already using cloud-based services, and this may already be a ready-to-go component of SASE. It's about half and half at this point. You have firewalls, everybody does. Possibly your vendor has already moved to firewall as a service and has a plan for that, but that's probably not the best place to start looking for SASE today. Secure Web Gateway, more than half of that market today is already cloud-based, so there's a good chance that your Secure Web Gateway solution is already ready for SASE. Almost all of the CASB solutions are cloud-based. It's a relatively new market, and it started in the cloud. So probably, if you already have a CASB solution, you're there. And ZTNA is the newest of all of these markets, and one of its strengths has always been the cloud-based nature of it. So if you have ZTNA, you probably already have a piece of that SASE solution. Here are some recommendations for you on how to plan and move forward on your own SASE journey. The first thing to do is to make a gap analysis. Look at where you have SASE and where you don't have SASE. You are just taking an assessment. You're taking inventory of where you do. And it's not as simple as 5 things and check, check, X, check, X. you probably are going to have different versions of things in your network in different places, or you may have things that are ready for refresh sooner than other places. But starting with a map of what you have and where you have is the first step. The next thing that you want to do is look at where would you start to migrate? Where would you start to move things? Some of those solutions like Web Gateway and CASB, if they're not already moved into the cloud, those are places where you can quickly move to the cloud. Places where firewall is in place, that might be a little more difficult to move to the cloud right away. But branch or smaller office locations are probably much more favorable to move to this cloud-based approach than some large data centers. So this is how you start to prioritize things. The other thing that you may look at is you may have just invested in a new solution that's more of a traditional approach. And so you need to use it for a couple of years before you're ready to retire that. So that will also affect the way you prioritize things. Once you've found your gap, you know where the important things in the areas that you need to focus on, and you've prioritized them, you should start to have a fairly good idea of where you want to go. And this will help to inform which vendors are going to get there for you. Those vendors that are already part of your infrastructure, you already have pieces of them with the 5 that work well, that's probably a great candidate for you to move forward. You need to look at their vision and how they would help you move there. This is also the place where managed services should start to be part of your conversation. Does managed service make sense for you? Does it help you get there a little bit more quickly? Do they have some of the skills that your team may not be as it's advanced in to help you move into some of these cloud-based architectures quickly? This is the way that you start to pick some of those vendors. Now, in closing, I have just a few recommendations for you. When you look at SASE, plan for it as a phased approach. Don't necessarily expect to start and be there tomorrow. This is something that might take a few years. And this is a place where professional services and managed services really, really can make sense. Now, vision is something that's going to be very important, as I mentioned, not just for yourself and how your own path would be to get up to SASE, but also the vendor that you want to work with. What is their path to get you there, as well as to continue to evolve and build their solutions to make them stronger? That's really important when we talk about SASE more than some other products. Look at how many points of presence or POPs that they have. Can they support you in all of the locations that are important to your organization? This is something that maybe you're not too excited to hear, but as we converge and consolidate, some of the advanced capabilities and features are going to disappear. Be prepared to give up some of those advanced capabilities. Not ones that are critical that you absolutely cannot live without, but the ones that you like that maybe make your life a little bit easier, but you can live without, those are ones that you should be prepared to give up. If you're prepared going into it, you'll be much more ready to embrace and adapt SASE, and it'll be a smoother process for you. And finally, SASE is a great opportunity to embrace managed services, both in the planning and in the upkeep, but also in the migration path itself. You may find that offloading management completely to a managed services makes sense as well. Thank you so much for listening to what I had to say about the trends that we're seeing, cloud security in general, managed services, and SASE. I hope that you enjoy the rest of the conference.